Hey everyone, welcome to the newly named Dismantling Doctrine podcast, formerly known as the Mindshift podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Clint Haycock, and I'm an ex-evangelical former pastor and Bible college teacher of more than 2 decades. In fact, I spent my entire life trying to serve God faithfully in everything I did, only to deconstruct my former Christian faith and walk away from it all about 10 years ago. Now it's time to dismantle some doctrines, basically whatever controlling belief system or cultic psychology that may be holding you back from recovering your authentic identity. Or maybe you're concerned about the dangers posed by the Christian right and Christian nationalism in government today. We need to dismantle those destructive doctrines too. If any of that sounds interesting to you, please subscribe to the show. You can find the Dismantling Doctrine podcast on Apple Podcasts, Podbean, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
Welcome everyone to I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist. Exciting episode. It's a birthday episode today, Troy. Happy 100th.
Happy 100th episode. I was a teenage fundamentalist. You know, we always say it's exciting. We always do every single episode. Oh, we've got an exciting guest, or it's exciting. It's exciting. It's exciting. It's exciting. Let's stick with the theme.
It is exciting. 100 episodes. I mean, that's 100 episodes of us just talking. We could sit back and listen to us for days.
I know, it's like 99 episodes and then another one.
You've always been good at math.
I am good at maths. Or it's like 103 episodes minus 3.
Okay, now you're starting to lose me.
Oh, really?
Okay, no, I'm there. Yeah.
Yeah, well, you did go and bake bread for a while, didn't you? You did. You left school.
Hey, I'm actually known for my mathematical prowess. I can usually do conversions of percentages and everything in my head super fast. And I got into trouble in high school with this because I can do sums and, multiplication, division, whatever, in my head, but I don't know how I do it. It's really weird. So I would get accused of cheating because I would get things right, but I couldn't explain how I'd done it. And to this day, I can't explain how I do it. And my youngest daughter is similar. She works things out very differently in her head, but on paper can't do it. And I'm the same. On paper, I just can't do it, but I can do it in my head. It's maybe slightly Rain Man.
All right, well, let's try a couple. Ready? What's 75% of 100?
75.
What's 35% of 100?
35.
What's 25% of 100?
75?
No, you got 2 out of 3. Not bad.
Yeah, not a bad strike rate. But yeah, so that's just a little weird, quirky thing about me. I think where it came from was when I was young, we used to do a lot of driving. And we drove from Melbourne to Perth, which for those playing at home is about 3,200 kilometres or 2,000 miles. And we would be driving and my dad would say to me, okay, we're going to be travelling at 110 kilometres an hour. We plan on stopping for lunch. It's 116 kilometres to there. How long will it take us to get there? And I'd have to work those out. And they were games that we would play on the road. Fun for the whole family. And I think that's where my math skills came into play. I could do them in real life stuff, but school could get fucked.
As a primary teacher, that's what we called mental maths, the ability to do it in your head. And it's actually a skill. And we moved away from that in our age when we were schooling, and it sort of came back around again. Whole idea of mental maths. I remember my father trying to teach me mental maths, and I'm like, no, that's not how we do it. We do it with pen and paper. Shut up. And so there you go. Well, Brian, 100 episodes. It's a long time, yeah, and it's a lot of episodes. And there's been so much that we have covered. And look, I don't want this episode, and I know you don't either, to be a retrospective. So this isn't a clip show like on Happy Days. Remember when they used to do like a clip show, and then you'd sit there going, oh, I've seen all these. It's just a cheap way of putting out another episode. That's not what this is, people, so hang around. But before we do get into what we do want to talk about, I do want to say congratulations, Brian McDowell, on 100 episodes. Well done.
Right back at you. Trophies in the mail. It'll be coming. It'll be presented by the mailman, so make sure that you thank him. It's done. We've done all right. we've done all right.
We have, and we came out at the gate really early. Not fast enough for me, but still. 2022, we got an Australian Podcast Award nomination. We were up against 7am and, ABC News and SBS News podcasts. That's just phenomenal. And then the next year, we were just like, nah, that was a bit shit. There's nothing really comes out of it. Let's not even apply for a podcast award this year. But that was cool. Really, and be able, we still have that on our email signature saying, oh, yeah, by the way, in 2022. I wonder how long it's going to be before we have to go, we have to remove that because people look at it and go, yeah, they're resting on their laurels. That's a long time ago. Moving on.
Yeah, I think so, because I know that when I go to a bakery or something and they say best pie winner 1997, I go, your glory days are over. You probably should take that off the window. So we may move into similar territory down the track.
Yeah, down the track. But I reckon got a few more years of leaving that up.
Yeah, I agree. It's only 2 years ago. So, no, let's keep it. Let's live in that. And that was fun. And Kerry, thank you for meeting us at the Podcast Awards. That was a fun night. It was a bit of an eye-opener to the industry. And so we say inside. But I don't think it was for either of us. We both came away going, yeah, this isn't why we do it. It would have been lovely to win an award. But, we came in the top 6 for Australia. And that was good enough.
We did. And that was cool. Hey, so Brian, let's talk about this episode and what we plan to do. And I think we wanted to talk about life after church. Basically, that's what this 100th episode is all about. Life after church. What happened? How did we end up here? Where are we now? Etc. And I still haven't dropped my episode about how I actually ended up losing my faith. I think anyone who's been listening to the show would know, the trajectory that I was on. And in one sense, you can see how I lost my faith. But I haven't done an episode about, and then I lost my faith. So that's coming, and that's coming in only a few episodes' time. But let's talk about, okay, we walked away. We decided that was it. We're done with church. We're done with God. We're done with religion. What now? Is it okay that I throw to you first and you start that?
Yeah, and we'll intersperse throughout, I'm sure, because that's what we do. For me, like when I first left the church, I think I brought a special guest along with me. I brought Jesus. So I tried to retain Jesus and went, okay, it was the church that was shit, but Jesus is really good. I'm going to take him with me. And I think I realized over time, and it took several years, that I didn't want to take Jesus with me either, because I don't think that I really appreciated him hanging around anymore. So I understood, that definitely some of the social justice principles, all of those sort of things definitely influenced. And I actually am I'm going to segue across to Bart Ehrman's new book, which I think it's around basically social justice has its roots in Christianity. So that's going to be an interesting one to see what comes from that. But I think that that's where I was at. I was unable to separate the fact that social justice was the thing I was hanging on to. I saw its roots really in the progressive movement that I'd moved towards relatively soon after Christianity, because if I think I was a Christian 20-ish years, and of that, my fundamentalist years were less than 5 years of that. So after that, it was really in the progressive space. So that was the stuff that shaped me. But it took me a while to understand what I wanted to move on from. And I think for me, a lot of that was fear-based as well. If I let go of Jesus, it means I let go of salvation. And, many years on, I know that was absolutely all in my head. But it's a real fearful thing. And I see this all around me still. I see with family, if anything, they are Christian in name and identification of the different denomination that they're a part of. But a lot of them, their actions are just like, really? You don't have your roots in anything that I would have seen as Christianity. It's just this tribalism bullshit.
Yeah. Speaking of Jesus, one of the things that I remember quite strongly, and I actually had a blog for a little while, and maybe I'll publish that in the show notes, but I actually chronicled my walking away from the faith more from a theological, philosophical perspective. But one of the things that I did notice was my imaginary friend was gone. So for the longest time, I would talk to Jesus, and it was Jesus. It wasn't the Holy Spirit. It wasn't God the Father. In the revival center, it was funny because you'd sort of had this deistic, like God out there who was ready to judge you. But in the AOG and other evangelical forms, you had this personal relationship with Jesus. And I used to talk to him regularly, oh, Jesus, give me a car park, that kind of stuff, but not just, that sort of superficial stuff. I would genuinely talk to him about shit that was going on in my life. And I would, whether it was actually in prayer or whether it was under my breath or whatever, I had this person that was there that I never felt alone, right? And I always had this person, and I really believed that he was there and that he would sometimes speak back to me, in my thoughts. Sometimes I would, sort of trying to discern the voice of God and, what's Jesus really saying to me, because he played hide and seek, this Jesus friend of mine. But when I finally came to the point where I said, and I said it out loud, right, which was, I don't believe Jesus was the Son of God, and I don't believe he rose again. That whole, if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord, God has raised him from the dead, you will be saved, right? I actually made a conscious decision to say, I don't believe Jesus was the Son of God, and I don't believe he rose from the grave. And I even took it one step further and said, and he's dead in a hole somewhere in Palestine. I actually said that out loud. So when I came to that point, there's no one left to talk to. You know what I mean? This imaginary friend, this person that I've been carrying around with me, and I guess, it was just another part of myself. But there was a real tangible love for this, I don't know, this deity, this Jesus figure. I used to sort of visualize him in my head. He used to sort of wear a white, long white robe and everything. I never had him sort of, gold sash and commanding the angels. He was just sort of there in my mind. And it was this sort of wispy figure, but at the same time, it was totally Jesus, and I would speak with him. And so, yeah, when he went, I was alone, and it was really sad. I actually missed him, right? It's funny to say that, you got this invisible friend that you later realized was never actually there, but I totally missed him and being able to talk to him.
And I'd like to say to you that he says right now that he misses you as well.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Word of knowledge, word of wisdom, word of whatever, word of Doritos. I don't know where that came from, but he was gone, and it was really, really tough, and I really missed him. So that was actually quite profound, and I was conscious of that. It wasn't like I looked back and went, wow. No, I was like, oh, I don't have my friend anymore, and I don't have this part of myself, I guess, that I used to bounce things. It just sounds like schizophrenia, I know. And I don't say that to be flippant. It does. It sounds like I was schizophrenic. But, I wasn't. It was just we were taught to partition off this part of ourselves. I miss that a lot.
Yeah, and I definitely identify with that. For a long time after I formally left Christianity, I'd find myself praying every now and then when something was a bit hard. I was just like, oh my God, I'm going to. But it wasn't, I wasn't picturing praying to Jesus. I was just praying to God and just hoping something good came of that prayer. And I think I've said this before on the pod. A couple of times I would fall into speaking in tongues and I'd find myself going, what the fuck are you doing? But it was so habitual and it was comforting and it was meditative and, it really helped. But it's interesting. There was two very pivotable. No, that's not a word.
Pivotable. I reckon it could be. It was pivotable. It was somehow a point of pivot, and it was pivotable.
Well, my boss wrote an email yesterday and sent it. And at the end, we were talking about what we were advocating for currently at work. And she wrote advocare. And it stuck. And it's now going to become a word because you're advocating in a caring way. So I like it.
I think you should change your organization name to Advocare. Seriously, it sounds really good. It's better than Family Church Life Centre or whatever it's called.
It's definitely not Family Life Church Centre or whatever you just said, but it's interesting. There was two pivotable. I'm going to stick with pivotable
Stick with it.
times where there was quite a crisis in when I was still married. There was some health stuff happening. It was really uncertain. Two very young children. The church really got around us, and it was almost like a blitz. So this went on for probably a week and a half, where everyone came in and they cared and they helped and they did practical things like cleaning the house and assisting with paying for childcare, all those sort of things. It's like, oh my God, really feel the love. And about a week and a half after that, people were like, well, you're a Christian, so everything should be okay now. And, Jesus will look after you. And everyone started to withdraw their help. But who came in were my friends from uni, my very good friends who had stuck by me and continued to stick by and helped us out in many different ways. They were the ones offering support. I saw a glimpse of that at the time and I thought, no, that's okay. The church still helped out. But then I think for me, the breaking point was when I split with my ex-wife, long time ago now, but when that happened, the church weren't the ones there for me again. They were friends. I had friends fly down from another state to come and hang out with me for a few days. I had other friends from work who got around me. Friends from church, I think they found it really, really difficult because we were both in that same church at that time and they didn't know who to get around and who to help. And there was certain cliques that got around her, certain cliques that got around me. And I actually made a conscious effort in going, you know what, I'm actually not going to put it on people to make that decision. I'll be the one to leave. And it was easy for me to drift away because my support systems were no longer in the church. And I'd realised that. And I'd looked back on that other event, which was maybe 3, 4, 5 years prior to that as well, and gone, the same thing happened. It was a blitz and it was a little bit of a help and a bit of a boost. But all of a sudden, my support systems were outside of the church. So I didn't have an anchor there anymore. Jesus and I had also begun to drift apart and our friendship was no longer. So I think that's where I started to drift away and consciously made that effort.
So what does that mean then if you actually said, okay, I'm not going to put this on them, I'm going to drift away? What does that mean then when you look back? Is there any blame on the church or on those people for not being there if you actually didn't give them the chance? Like, is it fair to say they weren't there for me, or do you not say that at all?
Look, I probably did at the start, but when I look back on those situations, and particularly that situation of when we split, I think it's like any friendship group. When you've got a tight friendship group and you split, it really causes tension on who sits with who is going to support who, and it becomes really difficult because then you don't get invited to particular social situations because like, oh, I can't invite one of them, so I'm not going to invite either of them, and that starts to drift apart. So I get that, and I didn't blame anyone for that, and I knew that because I'd supported friends who divorced prior to that, and I knew how difficult that was, so I didn't put that on them. What I did get really pissed off about was I made efforts to catch up with a few of them. And again, it was short and sharp, probably a bit longer, about a month this time, where people were like, yeah, let's all hang out. But it got too hard for them. And it was just all too difficult. And I'd expressed to a few of them, including my senior pastor at the time, that I didn't think I believed anymore. And it really had been quite a long time coming. And this had just brought it to a head. It just got too hard. And I found that, I don't know, it was fearful. I was fearful at the time because I was like, fuck, what do I go to next? But I just found a whole world open to me. It wasn't that it was going to be a narrow passage through and I would have to fight for everything, which was my fear, but it just opened up. And I found that genuine, deep friendships and support system laid outside of the church walls. And I didn't need that community to thrive any longer. And in fact, that community, without knowing, had probably held me back from a broader, richer experience of life.
Very good. Well, Brian, 我的住在中国的时候, in my time living in China, Facebook had just come out. I remember my dear friend Robin sent me this email that, you know, it's sort of some sort of form email or automated email, which said, hey, I found this thing called Facebook. I thought you might like it too, you know, and I sort of went, oh, what's this? And I ignored it for a little while. And then I eventually opened it up, clicked on it, you know, and back in those days, it hadn't been banned yet in China. And all of a sudden, I was just thrown back into this world where I was connecting with all these church people, right? They all just sort of came back. And so I had been on the sort of path to saying, I don't believe anymore. And I had pretty much accepted, like I said, you know, that Jesus hadn't rose from the dead and that he wasn't the Son of God and he was dead in a ditch in Palestine. That was my thing. You know, that was my sort of statement. And he was dead in a ditch in Palestine. So, of course, all of a sudden I'm reconnecting with these people. And I don't know, this must have been like 2005, 6, 7, somewhere around there. Maybe not even as 7, maybe 2005, 2006, which is funny because I actually have been out of church for 25 years. And I have pretty much walked away from the faith, as in personally inside my heart, for 20 years. Right. So if you want to talk about life after church, sure, I've had a lot of it. I've had 20 years of my 50-something years, you know, almost half my life now has been outside of church. And actually, if you count the years before I joined, because you and I were teenage fundamentalists, then it's been more than half my life. But anyway, I was all of a sudden connected with all these people and they're coming back to me on Facebook and talking to me as if, oh, how you been? And, you know, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, really good. Jesus is dead in a ditch in Palestine. And it was like that. And you can remember, I was angry. I was so angry. Oh, man. And I don't look at that and think, oh, you know, I shouldn't have been so. No, I don't. I really don't. Even though I'm not angry anymore, that was a really normal, healthy stage, I think. And for a lot of us to go through that. But for me, being connected to Facebook, I think the generations before, we would walk away and then never see these people again or see them in the street or whatever you do. But all of a sudden we were connected with these people through social media. And so I'm just putting up, you know, memes and all this kind of shit, but not just on my page. People would accept me as friends and then I'd start posting it on their pages, you know, just really insulting full on shit, you know, because I was pissed, because I was really angry. Like, not only had the Revival Center done what they'd done to me, you know, kicking me out and, you know, totally destroying my self-esteem and all that kind of stuff, then the AOG did it after that. They didn't kick me out, but they excluded me, you know, socially and just devastated me. And I was like, no, fuck you. You know, you don't get to think that I just drifted away and it was all on me. No, this is you people and this is your culture and I went to town. And so I'd been reading Dawkins, you know, Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett and, you know, influenced by, I'd never read the Sam Harris book at the time, but I had been influenced by him. I was reading a lot of infidels.org, which is a website back in the day that was collecting a lot of this anti-religion, mostly anti-Christian, because, you know, we're in the Western world, anti-Jewish stuff, but not anti-Semitic, anti-religious Jewish stuff. And I was full of this, oh, how did I not see this? How did I not see this for all these years? And I was angry at them. I was angry at myself. And I want to throw to you because you remember that time to a point where because you were still in church, I think, and you were one of these people that I was like, oh, hey, Brian, how you going? Fuck you, dead in a ditch in Palestine. Yeah, I'm living in China. Fuck you, dead in a ditch in Palestine, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. Because you and I had stayed in contact with email and even phone calls every now and then. But definitely when you were released into the world of Facebook, you were a pain in the ass. And I remember a couple of times messaging you because you'd go, did you block me? Did you just delete that off your page? I'm like, yes, I did. You're pissing people off. And you were incredibly angry. I agree. It was like a new world had opened up to you. A lot of people had moved forward, moved on, but you came back into that point where you were like, fuck this, I'm still here and I'm going to let you know where I'm at. And yeah, it was definitely very angry. And I've always used Facebook as a platform to get a few laughs, really, and just to share memories and, have a good time. And for me, it got really serious. It was just like, oh, you're offending these people that I still called my friends at the time. And it was really interesting, actually, just as a side note to that. I remember there was a couple of people in particular that at the time I was still friends with and had been really close friends in the past. And I was starting to talk about fundamentalist Christianity. It was when fundamentalist Islam had really started to ramp up. It must have been, I don't know, 2005 to 2008, somewhere around that time anyway. And I remember having a conversation with them over dinner and going, I believe that fundamentalist Christianity is as damaging, if not more, than fundamentalist Islam. And I remember they just ripped into me. And I remember your name coming up during this conversation. And they're like, oh, it's just like Troy and his stuff and saying this and that. And I was like, yeah, maybe. And
yeah. I've got my hand in the air right now going, fucking yeah, good one, Brian.
Absolutely. You're fist pumping it. But I did, and I truly believed that because I fucking hated fundamentalist Christianity by this time, and I was well into the progressive space. I was definitely in church still when you were posting all that stuff, and I was trying to keep people happy, I think, as well. And I got a bit protective, and I don't think I was protective of Christianity as such at that time because I was moving into that space of going, yeah, I'm still a Christian, but I don't believe this, I don't believe that. And I was really wavering, but I think I was protective of them as people and understanding that they may have done things, they may have said things, but, it wasn't with intent. But that pivotal point for me over that dinner conversation, both of these people in particular became so incredibly aggressive and attacked me. And they were so precious about their fundamentalist Christianity that they could not accept that it could be put in the same basket as fundamentalist Islam. So you and I think at that time started to become allies without even knowing we were becoming allies in the cause. But I reckon I started was that sort of point that I could see where you were coming from. I could see exactly where it had gone wrong for you and where it probably had come to light for you going, this is all shit. So here we were joining up and becoming allies. So good on you for your campaign back then on Facebook.
Well, it wouldn't be the first time that an angry atheist and a progressive Christian walked into a bar. Do you know what I mean? Like that there is a lot of kinship, and here comes the word. There's a lot of fellowship, brother. There's a lot of fellowship between those two camps. And we see that, in what we do now. I wouldn't do that again. If I could wind back knowing what I know now and being who I am now, of course I wouldn't do that. And I wouldn't be so angry. I wouldn't be so aggressive. I was picking fights. I wasn't just defending myself. I wasn't just like I was out there looking for it and picking fights. Like you said, Troy is constantly the evangelist. And I was out there de-evangelizing. People say, oh, you hear Bart Ehrman saying, oh, I'm not trying to ruin anyone's faith. Fuck that. I wanted to ruin as many faiths as I possibly could because this shit was destructive and I was angry. So apologies for the way I was, yes. But what I mean is in telling the story, I won't pretend. I was totally out there to try and destroy things. And so I had a blog, as I said before, where I would just, what's going on? The Paul's conversion happened this way here. And, later on in Acts, Paul's conversion is told this way, and this is not the same. And they contradict, and you can't have them both. This book is shit. And I can remember to Anthony Van Brown distancing himself from me because I was just so fucking angry. And I don't think he was necessarily not agreeing with what I said, more how I said it, or maybe back then he was still disagreeing with what I said. But, we've talked about that he and I since. He's like, I can remember you were not in a healthy place and I intentionally put you at a distance. And it's like, cool, man, I get that. That's where I was at. But at that point that we're talking about, that sort of 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, around there, I was on the way to becoming toxic, if not already. But it got worse because I wasn't getting any support. There was no therapy. There was no nothing. There was just me by myself with the internet and just falling down these holes. And I can remember a good friend of mine, Jacko, saying to me once, you know, as much as what you're saying is true, and he was reading all the, the Dennett and the Dawkins and all that kind of stuff, the four horsemen of the apocalypse, of the new apocalypse, we called it. He said, but church does a lot of good for orphanages and hospitals and all that kind of stuff. And he said, you can't deny that. And I'm like, nah, fuck that. No, blah, blah, blah. I wouldn't hear a good word about church, Christianity, nothing. It was just like, nah, as atheists, we need to basically find out how to better do this, and we need to one up them. And, man, and even telling you now, you can hear, I was fucking pissed, because how dare they rob me of so many years of my life? And how dare I have been so fucking stupid to have left the Revival Center and then go and join the AOG and do it again? But the one group that I wasn't angry with was my inner city Church of Christ, that sort of leftist leaning, borderline progressive group. I still wanted their acceptance, because their acceptance of me had meant so much, having been rejected, at least socially by that AOG context. And so I tried really hard to stay in touch with a lot of those people. But like you said, when you move away from those circles, and I had moved away by country, and we didn't have, smartphones and everything yet. They were on their way. So there's this way of staying in touch with people and front of mind with people in a regular way through technology was coming. It was starting to appear, but I was out of mind, out of sight, out of mind. And I took it a little bit personally. I really did. I was like, well, here we go again. And I don't think it was malicious. I don't think the intent was aggressive in any way, shape, or form. But I was like, hold on, I've left the church, but I'm still supposed to be your friend, aren't I? And I wasn't hearing from them. I'd write to them, I'd call people. I mean, there was even some ex-AOG friends who had also migrated, moved on. They were sort of becoming Pentecostal refugees themselves. They weren't responding to me either, like literally just not at all. And it really hurt. And so that added to my pain as well, I think. And so it fueled the fire of atheism. So you and I talk about this militant atheist stage. Fuck, man. It was intense, but it was fueled by a rage.
You're raging against the machine. There is no doubt. What did you run to then? Or did you bury yourself into that rage and use that to fuel the fire?
I ran to booze. I drank a lot. I've talked about that in my Korea episode, Singapore episode. I drank for a really long time, Brian, a really long time. It wasn't all just because of this, because of church. As you know, I've been diagnosed with ADHD. And the thing about ADHD is you just can't slow down sometimes. And so in that, I think I enjoyed the hangover as much as I enjoyed the actual getting drunk, because the getting drunk was happiness and woo and fun and all that kind of stuff. But then, the next day or two, my whole system would just go, as you do when you're hungover, right? I would actually enjoy that. My brain stopped racing, my drive to do something. And so there was a lot of reasons why I was drinking. It wasn't just church, not to mention whatever sort of trauma I was carrying and not having sort of dealt with. So I definitely ran to the booze. I ran to a kind of intellectualism as well. And that was very much centered around atheism. And so this intellectual approach to religion and to life. And I came to the conclusion that there was no spiritual dimension at all. There is nothing. And that there was no, the experiences that you and I have talked about that we've had since then or before then, it was all made up. It's completely fiction. And in that sense, I was again certain. And I was happy with my certainty that there is no spirituality, there is no supernatural dimension. I am, locked into that. Now, I know that people from that camp might say, oh, well, you didn't really embrace it intellectually, you only embraced it emotionally. No, I was convinced. I was convinced in my mind. I was happy with that. But there was so much unresolved. And that's why I can probably be a little bit patronizing with atheists, because these and I don't mean all atheists, I mean atheists that are certain of their atheism and get all militant, because it's like, hey, I've been there. And I think it's an emotional response as much as it can be an intellectual response. At least it was for me. Now, I'm not talking about, people that are just like, there is no God and, life goes on. I'm talking about that hardcore atheism where you're out to actually destroy people's religion and destroy people's faith because, you're basically certain that it's bullshit. That's where I was. But from a positive perspective, I had kids. I had these two little absolute darling children who were just wonderful, and it brought me a lot of joy. So I wasn't just sitting there festering. I would have times where I would fester, and then these other times where I just had these amazing kids. Also, I was living in China, and there was just so much to see and so much to do. I'm taking in this whole culture. I'm reading Chinese classics in English, right? I'm learning another language. I'm exploring a culture. I'm going traveling and seeing that part of the world. And I also did my master's in journalism through the University of Queensland by distance and on site. So I would sometimes pop back to Australia and do classes. I would other times, do them by distance. And it was the early days of the internet for education. It was phenomenal. I loved it. I focused on China's censorship and China's closed media system as most of what I was doing for my assignment. So I would reach out to my lecturers and say, hey, I live in China. This is what's going on around me. Can I negotiate a topic that ties into this? So I became very much this is at a postgraduate level, I very much became at that time an expert around Chinese media, Chinese censorship. So there was that going on too. And I was loving that. So it wasn't all just negative, nasty, And I had friends in China who, some of them were drinkers, some of them weren't. Bought myself a little electric motorbike, and food and life. And so it was good and it was bad. But I think the Facebook thing was where you guys outside of that just saw the rah, but it wasn't all the time. A lot of the time it was, noodles and rice and partying and going out to see, 1,500-year-old temples. And that was happening too. And it was exciting. It was great. And it was very much what I needed. I needed to drop myself into something other than religion whilst dropping myself heavily into working out religion.
Yes, we only saw the crouching tiger, hidden dragon. That wasn't so hidden most of the time. The dragon was
you
out.
saw the tiger and the dragon, not too much crouching, not too much hiding. Yes, it was the fuck you.
Absolutely, it was full on. It was interesting. I because I saw it as a license to walk away, as we've spoken about, and lots of our guests have spoken about a similar thing. When you have a serious breakdown of a relationship, whether that's a long-term one or a marriage or whatever it may be, there's a break. There's a break that you can actually just walk away more freely, and that's what I did. And I think I walked into a space where I could finally go, I'm just leaving it behind. All those doubts that I've had for a long time, I'm no longer in that system which is constantly trying to reinforce it. I no longer have to try and convince myself of something that I've been so uncertain about and sort of gone back and forth on so many times. So the ability to just go, actually, I owe nothing to that system now, and I don't owe it any more of my thoughts. I moved away pretty freely, and I didn't have guilt. I had a little bit of fear, of course, which a residual fear, which over time went away. But just walking into that freedom of going, here's life, and I'm going to embrace it, and I'm going to create it, and what's next is going to be good. And I think one thing that helped me is because I work in a sector which is often called, for purpose, not for profit work, is that I had a purpose as well still, and I could channel into that purpose. I was paid to have purpose. So, what a great setup for me. So I was able to channel it through, and I guess find more identity in that and throw myself into the things that I'd felt contradiction with for a while. And that was around some of the social justice stuff within Christianity. I think Christianity tried to work really well, or the progressive expression work really well within the social justice space. But again, it felt a little bit half done. So I moved into that, moved into just rich friendships because I'd been married for so long. Now I'd been married, I don't know, 16, 17 years. So, all up altogether for about 18 years, that I then jumped in and out of relationships for a few years and had some fun. And it was fantastic. And I just lived life. I got to know myself. I got to know who I was and not be told who I was by a system or a belief system which said that you have to be this and you have to express it that way. It's like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to be myself, unfiltered and uninhibited. And God, it was freeing and I loved it. So I had a few years of that. And I found so many new experiences. A mate and I traveled for a few weeks in Southeast Asia and just had some fun going out, partying, and just being part of something that wasn't bound up. And it was just wonderful. And I just loved it. And I was starting to love life, not trying to process it through a filter, which I had to test whether it was good or bad. It was all good. And it was all a fuck ton of fun.
So what mattered to you by this stage? And where are you in terms of years?
This is around about, I reckon, 2010 or 11 through to maybe 2014. So about 3 or 4 years of just going out, living life, enjoying it with no ties to anything necessarily except my children. I had custody of my girls 50% of the time. So obviously that was a real anchor. But because it was week on, week off, I had a week to go and do whatever. But even when they were with me, just like always when they were growing up, they were fully involved in social life anyway. So they would always come out wherever we were going and socialise. So I don't think, besides the fact that they didn't have both parents together in doing that, they were still experiencing similar things, but probably with different people. I think that was all part of it. But I think that was I don't know. I wasn't consciously trying to recreate myself or anything. I was just consciously going, let's just live. Let's just have some fun. Let's not be concerned about what happens. Let's just be a good person. And I continued to do that. And I think that's still my philosophy today is do no harm. Just have a good time. Do no harm and do as much good as you can with what you've got. And I'm still grateful for the prosperity, and I'm talking about money and things like that. And of course, that comes with it. But I'm talking the prosperity of life. Just being able to go. I live in a great country. I live in a fantastic part of the world where I have this freedom to express myself and define myself not through some preordained filter or identity, that I can just be me. So that was for a few years there before I partnered with my current partner, who I'm still with, 10 years on, so, or close to. So, there was so much good stuff happening. But I know around this same time, there was stuff happening for you.
Well, just before I get to me, it was interesting listening to you talking about this living life and stuff. I think it's Aristotle who talks about the flourishing. Or maybe it's Plato, but I'm pretty sure it's Aristotle who talks about the flourishing. And that's basically what you're saying, right? You just basically thought, I'm just going to flourish. I'm going to do my best to flourish and enjoy life. But I do have another question for you before I keep going with my saga. What about the fear of hell? How long really did it take you to get past that?
Look, I think I deconstructed hell before I left Christianity. So for me, hell just didn't make sense. And so it's not something that I actually carried with me, because even as early as 2007, 2008, I had got rid of that. I just thought it was absolute rubbish. And I think I've said this before, that my reasoning for that was, if that was God's plan to chuck people in hell and torture them eternally, then it's not a God for me. So I'd already made my mind up of going, well, if they're a package, I don't want part of that package. So when I walked away, I probably still had pangs of it every now and then. It would just come up going, oh my God, what you're doing, it's just wrong, it's sinful, whatever. And I was able to get rid of that pretty quickly. Like, it didn't stick with me. They were fleeting thoughts, certainly not something that seeped into my consciousness at all. So I was fortunate with that. I didn't have to deconstruct that like many things, because I walked away over such a long period of time, I deconstructed so many things. So when I walked, it was so gentle, and I didn't have the anger. I didn't have a lot of that baggage to work through in terms of my faith, because I'd already jettisoned most of it.
Yeah, well, I mean, if I could have chosen the way that I was going to go, I would have gone that way. But I don't know, man. There was other factors at work that just sort of pushed me in other directions, I guess, and things within myself. So about the same time as you know, you're talking about that sort of, 2010, 2011, around there. About 2008, I moved from one Chinese town to another, and well, one Chinese town to a city. And when I say town, 6.5 million people, right? But it was still a Chinese version of sort of Ballarat or Bendigo, or for Americans, sort of like Charlotte, North Carolina. What I mean is it's big enough, but it's not super huge, but still 6.5 million people in the surrounding area. So we had KFC and Pizza Hut and that kind of stuff in this city. It wasn't so small that didn't exist. But I moved to a bigger city. I moved to Shenzhen, which is next to Hong Kong, which is, 20 something million. It is a full city. And I started working for an American international school. But what was interesting about this American international school is a lot of the people there were Christians, and they were secret missionaries in China. That's what they were. And they never told me that that's what they were, because they knew that I wasn't a Christian, and they're not going to trust, a non-Christian with that sort of information, because I made it very clear I'm not a Christian. But I knew all the signs. I knew everything that was, my kids would come back from the music class singing, King David, blah, 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 and all this kind of stuff. And I'm just like, and I went to one of the guys and said, dude, you cannot teach these kids these songs, because it was an international school. They were all kids with foreign passports, but they were all mostly Chinese, who had, the kids had been born overseas or something like that, but they were still very Chinese. So that on one hand, you could get away with more because it was a foreign cohort, but at the same time, these people were very smart in that they were basically getting into Chinese culture through this sort of back door. If they'd gone into a Chinese school and started doing this, they wouldn't have lasted 2 seconds. But at the same time, these people were Christians. And so here's me having, only through Facebook, all of a sudden I'm having to live with these people and having to work with these people. And it was just intense. But there was a few of us that weren't Christians who found each other and like, can you believe they're not teaching evolution in the high school? I know. Can you believe that? So bad, And it was a challenge to me to get along with these people and to work with these people. But at the same time, I did. And I put it aside that these people were Christians and just tried to ignore. But at the same time, I look back now and I think, what the fuck were you doing? That was the worst place for you to be. But I had kids. I wanted them into an American school. I didn't want them to go into the Chinese system. I wanted to stay overseas. So yeah, I did. And I remember one of the guys came to me one day and he was a little bit more progressive. And I made some snarky comments about Christianity, and he'd asked me what had come from, where, and I told him my backstory to a point. And then he said to me, what's happened to you, man? What has happened to you? But really condescending, like, shut up. Do you know what I mean? Like, what's happened to me? I'll tell you what's fucking happened to me. And I just looked at him and just thought, oh, whatever, and walked away. I didn't go into, well, here's what's happened to me. There was another guy who's, he was bragging that his son had just started at Bob Jones University. Like, oh, we want to, really praise God that our son has started at Bob Jones, which is hyper fundy, serious stuff. And we'd be on the bus and I'd say, oh, sorry, I was late. I had, this shit happened. And she would stick the fingers in her ear of her daughter who happened to be on the bus because I just said shit. Like, her daughter was a teenager, right? And it was like, okay, they were teachers at the school and still homeschool their child in China because they didn't want to put them in the school because they didn't agree with the curriculum and everything, even though they were teaching it. And they were secret missionaries. It was just the worst of the worst in terms of American Christianity that I was up against. Another one of the women who I was working with, she had her boyfriend at another school not far away because this is a network. And she and he moved in together. And the school wouldn't cancel her house that they were paying for and give her the money because they wouldn't recognize that these two were living together outside of wedlock. And so that's how religious the school still was, even though formally, officially, they're not a Christian organization. behind the scenes, they totally were. And they were in all these Eastern European countries, Asian countries, basically a place for secret missionaries to be secret missionaries. But they couldn't fill all the positions with secret missionaries. So people like us would flow in. But she was so angry, this woman. She's like, it's my money. It's my choice. And so basically what happened was, and you can see this in terms of like that Christian legalism, she went and lived with her boyfriend at their house in another city, and she would, train in and bus into our school every day. There's a house sitting empty in this neighborhood, and the school just continued to pay the rent in a kind of denial or acceptance of the fact that she's living with her boyfriend. They would, it was a principle, I guess, It was just insane. And here I am, allergic to Christianity, and this is where I work. And so, you're seeing this spouting of anti-Christian shit. That was on Facebook and stuff. That was the only place I could do it. I couldn't even do it in my workplace, except when I'd go and, connect with Sarah in our lunchtimes. That was her name. And we just whine and complain about this fucking moral uptightness of this place. So yeah, that was going on as well. And I was still angry and I was still hurt and I was not getting any therapy. And so, that was all happening. Eventually I moved on to Vietnam. I got out of there, worked at an Australian, completely non-religious school. It's really funny because someone said to me, "Oh, you're in Vietnam. My dad fought in Vietnam." I said, "Oh, really? My wife and I used to fight in Vietnam all the time. No big deal." And I, did that for a year. That didn't work out. And that's when I basically came back to Australia. And by that stage, I was able to get therapy. So for the last 10 years-ish, being back in Australia was when I started to deal with the therapy stuff, because I just couldn't get away from this pain that was inside me. And so that's when, over the last number of years, you and I doing the podcast and all that kind of stuff. But I worked in a Jewish school for a little while back here in Australia, and just the community and just the social justice mentality that they had. It was a really good school and a really good group of people. And they were sort of indirectly poking me, not intentionally, but poking me going, "You've lost your way. You're not such a good person anymore. You're angry, you're bitter, you do nothing for the community. You say these things matter to you, and they were living it, right?" And I was like, okay, this is interesting. And so, that's when I started exploring Judaism as an idea, because those things that I missed, a moral compass, community, social justice ethos, all that kind of stuff was coming back to me. So I started giving money to charities. My kids and I started looking at different charities we could give to. I also was going along to this Buddhist temple because I was trying to calm myself through meditation and that at the same time, right? I wasn't going to believe Judaism. I wasn't going to believe Buddhism, but I was looking for the things that I missed about religion through that book, Religion for Atheists, which really spoke to me about, hey, you're an atheist, but these things have actually got things that you may need in your life, and therapy and all that. And there was a pivotal point, Brian, that I hit where I went, I need to change who I am. And so I started doing this loving kindness meditation where I would actually wish myself well and wish other people well. And the people I was angry at, I would wish them well. And it's this kind of retraining of your brain to not be so angry. And it was a turning point. And it was a spiritual moment, but it can totally be defined as purely psychological. But I mean, it was spiritual in the sense that I emotionally, mentally, in my heart, I just turned around and went, no more anger. And you can probably remember that time. It was tangible. And all of a sudden I calmed right down. I started talking about, morality and the Buddha and progressive Judaism. And I was listening to all the podcasts and all that kind of stuff. And Alain de Botton, in his book, Religion for Atheists, he was right that religion did have something to offer me, but I didn't have to believe it. Just connecting with the cycle, just connecting with the calendar, just connecting with that moral compass was amazing. And like I said, I started giving to charity. I started taking a more generous approach to people in my life. When people would hurt me, I would do loving kindness meditation and just wish them well. And it's all happening internally, right? Like you're focusing outwards and wishing well to people and wishing well to the world. And it changes you because you're just not giving so much place for anger and so much place for hurt. And combined with therapy, I turned a corner. And, not long after that, we started to do the podcast. Because if I had done this podcast before, this would be more than just another angry podcast. This would have been fucking venomous. I mean, you wouldn't have had a bar of it, but it just would have been venomous. And it just wasn't right to put more of that out into the world.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying don't look back in anger. I heard you say.
You did. Yes, that's right. And I've got things to do, but Sally can wait. We're coming back to this. It's a theme that album.
Yes,
that has been a theme in this podcast. Remember, we talked about that.
Yeah. It was part of your agitation phase early on. I think this was maybe 1997 or 8, potentially. Where for those who may not have heard it, we're at a friend's wedding, and Troy was definitely in deconstruction phase and had started to listen to secular music, and Oasis's new album had come out, and he was evangelizing the album. And it's comical when you look back, but people were really offended by the fact that you were talking about secular music at this wedding just on your table, and you'd piss people off around that. And I remember at the time I was listening to that album going, what a great album. But you were driving it home.
I mean, imagine how it was, because a lot of those people were receiving my Facebook posts later in later years, But yeah, there was just a change. And that's why I'm very strong about, look, I get it. I get being angry, and people have to go through that. And I get it. And I don't judge. Be angry, fucking post, put your billboards up, all that kind of stuff. Go for it. But eventually you come to a place where you go, I can't live here. This is not good for me. And I know you can't just walk away from it. You have to process it, or it keeps coming back. That's where my struggle was. And so on the one hand, going overseas was great. On the other hand, I was disconnected from proper therapy and such. And not that it was necessarily easy to find either. But here I am now. So Brian, where do I live now? I live in a place where this doesn't hurt so much anymore. And I think the podcast was a big part of that. And obviously therapy was a big part of that. And connecting with the I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist listeners through Facebook and the meetups and everything has been a part of that. I'm not so angry. And I was thinking the other day, I reckon I could go to Great Big AOG and do an episode, where we go in and, take our recording devices, from a legal perspective, we have to make sure we're doing it all properly. But I don't think I'd trigger as badly as I would have when we first started this pod. I think this has been a massive healing journey for me. And also getting my ADHD diagnosis now, I think what happened was I had a lot of this trauma and a lot of this baggage on top of this ADHD. And I couldn't see it. And I couldn't touch the ADHD. And I think what's happened is through the podcast and through my therapy and all that kind of stuff, all this baggage has actually been pulled off. And now it's like, okay, here's what's underneath all this is this ADHD, and you need to treat this now. And that couldn't have happened with all the noise, with all the chatter of pain and hurt and church. That's all been taken off now. I'm not sitting here saying, oh, actually what was happening was underneath it all. It was all ADHD and it wasn't the church. No, fucking no. This all really happened, but it had to all be lifted off so I could deal with the deeper issues, things that were there before church. And that's what I'm dealing with now, with this adult diagnosis of ADHD, knowing that my special interests, this fascination with religion and post-religion and all the, that is all very much ADHD. The rejection sensitive dysphoria, it's combined for me. Those things were real that happened in church, but it's just so much more compounded by that. Also the mental racing, the comorbidity of anxiety, all that kind of stuff. I can deal with this now, and I am. I'm seeing specialists about that. It's got nothing to do with church. It was compounded by church, but it's got nothing to do with church. So being able to deal with all this, remove it all, means that I can continue to move forward into a place of healing and managing my own mental health and managing my own wellness and my own well-being. And I couldn't do that before when I was burdened by all that shit from church.
So that millstone is no longer around your neck, which is great.
Oh, there's a different one now because I make a podcast telling people they don't have to believe in Jesus. There's a different millstone.
Love it.
But no, you're right. That's right. That millstone is not there.
I had to bring it back to a Bible metaphor. But I think it's an interesting time as we do reflect on the fact that we are at 100 episodes. And I'm the same as you. Like, I think it's been really helpful, even though I don't think I had a great deal of trauma necessarily to work through. Certainly things have popped up every now and then through the podcast. I can attribute a lot of the help to the same things that you definitely spoke about. And some of it too was just the weird experience that I had compartmentalized as, a significant part of my life, was able to get some context in the broader parts of my life, I guess. And so the podcast has been helpful for that because it's helped me work through it and helped me actually work through what was happening. Why did I get involved in this community? What's happened to me while I was in it? What's happened since I came out? How does that actually shape who I am? And all of those things have been incredibly helpful because I do find that every now and then I pop back to that time and go, what the fuck? Like, what was that? And particularly when I see those around me who are still involved in it, which I don't see many of those people, but occasionally. And I think, how are you still in it? How are you actually still thinking that this is a healthy environment, particularly when I see some of their behaviors and some of the way that they think of the world. And I think this was actually magnified through COVID because of so many of the conspiracies that came up through the church, were embraced by the church, and subversively really just planted in people's minds. So they're so suspicious of the world around them. And what it's done is I've seen those people that were drifting to the edges actually magnetize straight back into the center of the church, because all of a sudden the church made itself relevant again to particular pockets of people because they had the truth in what was such an uncertain time. And people find that. I think people want certainty. They want to be able to believe in something that anchors them somewhere firmly and strongly, and that's part of who they are. And I just think that there's been a lot of stuff happening around me that's opened my eyes up even more over the last 2, 3, 4 years that has shown me just how damaging that space can be.
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that it's bad, it's wrong, it's not good for people. But at the same time, we live in a society, we live in a secular society, thank God, irony intentional. We live in a secular society where people are free to choose, right? And people are free to make good choices, people are free to make bad choices. And I understand that for some people, life's really hard. Well, for all of us, life's really hard. But for some people in particular, this is their way, this is their coping mechanism. And it may be maladaptive, but this is their coping mechanism. And if we were to try to take that away from them, they wouldn't cope. So I'm not trying to bring churches down anymore. You know that anyway, but I'm not trying to undo anybody's faith anymore. But if people come our way through the podcast or, into our personal lives and want my opinion, I'm happy to give it to them. But I get it. I was in those churches for a long time and I understand the attraction. I can't judge too harshly of those people. Where are we going to go as individuals, Brian? Where are we going to go with a podcast? Do we think that there's room to continue to journey? Do we think that there's room to continue to explore these other aspects of life, but from an ex-fundamentalist perspective? I think so. I think there's still room and I think there's still a place. I think we've seen a drop-off in our numbers since we stopped doing the church under a microscope and trauma episodes. And that's okay. People are where they're at, but I hope we can, I hope people can re-engage when they're ready for this forward-looking perspective. I really do, because I think that's as important as looking backwards was. Looking forwards is actually the next step for people to be free of all this and to actually have, a quality of life. And as you said before, or as I said before, the flourishing. And I don't think you can flourish by sitting in the trauma space. I just don't think it's possible.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, we do invite people to come and journey with us as we explore. And we're exploring things that we don't know about a lot of the time. So these are things that are new to us. And I guess what we want to do is just invite people to come along and hear about other things, hear about the broader world, hear about things that need to be demystified. Some of these other religions, other faiths that we've been talking about, we're trying to demystify them because we believe particular things about them when we were part of the church, and we're not trying to promote them. We're just trying to broaden our own horizons, and hopefully yours as well, around not everyone's bad, and not everyone has ill intent in what they're doing. And there are a lot of things that were taboo that don't need to be taboo. We need to explore. We need to understand. We don't need to agree, and we certainly don't need to endorse. But exploring is really, really helpful in contextualizing your own experience. And you realize how small your world is, really, when you start to look at all these other things. And I just think it's a healthy place to be. And as you said, Troy, not everyone's in the place where they can journey in that space. But for those who can, come along.
Yeah. I think the reason why church demonized a lot of these ideas is because they're a threat, because there is value in them. And, when you're looking for a religion, other religions are a threat to that. When you're looking for meaning and purpose, other areas of life that offer meaning and purpose are a threat to that. So I think it's good to look. I have no desire to be a traditional Buddhist or progressive Jew or progressive Muslim. I have no desire to be any of those things. And that's not what we're doing with presenting these episodes. We're just having a look and seeing what they say. It's funny how much crap was thrown, especially on Reddit. We have a Reddit channel, which we don't get a lot of traffic, but we've got people following, and I just publish episodes and things like that on there so that the Reddit people know that we've got stuff coming out. But some of the stuff in some of the other groups, some of the other ex-Christian groups, how dare you come along and talk about Islam, and you're just evangelizing Islam. Fucking listen to the episode. We didn't at all, and we didn't with Judaism either. And we're not going to with Hinduism, and we didn't with Buddhism. Although I will say Buddhism, secular Buddhism, meditation, centering yourself, all that kind of stuff can be quite good. I won't pretend that I'm not saying it's not. But yeah, I think, Brian, I love the idea of continuing to try and do good through this podcast. And, we've taken a leaf from Bart Campolo and John Wright's podcast, Humanize Me, where we're just looking at, hey, what about these things outside of Christianity and outside of the trauma? So I hope people can see the value in what we're trying to do. And if it's, it's what you want to do and where you want to go, stay with us. I hope that doesn't sound too needy. We're doing okay. We're not shutting down or anything, but it would be great for people to try to see the value of moving forward rather than just focusing on the pain.
And just like Jesus would have died if there was just one of you, we'll still keep recording if there's one of you. So it's not just about the numbers, but it's about that community. And I think we've seen our Facebook community continue to grow. And I think there's 1,500 or so members in there now. Again, most don't contribute. They're onlookers and listeners and curious maybe about what people are saying. But it's great to have so many people joining in on the conversation. It's great to have people listening and giving us feedback that most of the time is really, really lovely feedback. Sometimes I think we annoy people that we haven't asked particular questions to those guests that they feel that we should have asked things, but we've got a certain direction, and that's the direction that we're taking it at the moment. So thank you, everyone. But thank you for 100 episodes. We couldn't have done it without you.
I know, amazing, eh? 100 fucking episodes.
It's nuts. I mean, I can't remember the stats. I don't have them on me, but the amount of podcasts that don't go over 5 episodes is incredible. I think, we still remain in the top 1% of all podcasts and still got plenty of listeners. So, I want to thank everyone for that, and thank everyone for engaging, and for those who may have disengaged. I hope that your life is going okay. And I'm sure it is. Man, you won't hear
It's
this.
fine if you want to see other podcasts. It's fine if you want to see other podcasts, right? We can just call it. It's okay.
It
Yeah.
is. It is absolutely okay.
Well, you know what's interesting, Brian? I don't, except for Feet of Clay, I don't really listen to any other ex-evangelical podcasts anymore because it doesn't really yank my chain. And so for a lot of people out there, on the one hand, we're saying move on, move forward, and maybe they have. Maybe they look at this and go, thanks for what you did. But I'm okay now. I'm going to move on. I'm going to listen to podcasts about, mental health and true crime and live alive. And great. I'm going to wipe a tear from my eye as we, become empty nesters. But please go and live, people. And, if we're not where you're meant to be anymore, we're okay with that. But if you want to keep journeying with us, we would love to keep going because we take a lot of joy in what we do. And could you imagine if all we did was family and work?
Yeah, it's I've got plenty going on, but still like to find time for the podcast. And if people do want a recommendation, one I'm loving at the moment is The Ancients. It's with Lachlan Hughes, and it's a British podcast that started during COVID and has become like just incredibly successful. But it's super interesting, and it has some crossovers with Christianity because it's obviously about history. So it talks about things like early Christians, and it talks about pre-Christianity, and it talks about some of the influence on Christianity, the cultural stuff. It's fantastic. So it does give you a bit of a taste of both, but I love it. I'm addicted. It drops a couple of times a week, and it ends up in my ears within a couple of hours of it dropping. So it's always fascinating stuff.
It's in my playlist, actually, my Apple Podcasts list, and I haven't actually tapped in, but it came up as, recommended podcasts. I do a lot of ones on mental health. Obviously, with my more recent ADHD diagnosis, I do a lot of ADHD podcasts. That's my new special interest, is finding out how do I live with this and how do I treat myself and etc. But I also, I like you, enjoy the historical podcasts. There's one called Empire, which is all about the British in India, which is where my father's family actually came from, being my father being Anglo-Indian. That's really fascinating. I enjoy that one. I do like those sort of not just mental health, but also neuroscience podcasts about the brain and how the brain works. I think that's something that the whole ex-evangelical thing opened me up to, and seeing, how we respond to things. And so I enjoy that as well. I also enjoy, I love the Beatles. And so there's a Paul McCartney podcast where he talks about the songs that he wrote and things like that. There's just so much out there. You barely need an Audible subscription anymore because you can just tap into that. But you know what I do like? And you're going to scoff, I know, because I have become this more sort of open person to woo-woo than I used to be. Is there's a really good podcast of true, in air quotes, true ghost stories called Uncanny, and it's from the BBC. And it just tells these people are on there saying, this is really what happened to me. And it doesn't always, you can explain a lot of these without needing to believe in ghosts. But also some of it's just like, did this person just slip through time? Because they have these experiences where all of a sudden they're in the 1700s and people are trying to say, oh, it's a room full of ghosts. But actually, did you just step into some sort of time bubble? But these people are on there going, this really happened. No, I don't believe in ghosts, but I saw a room full of people from the 1700s. What are you going to do with it? And, maybe their brain blipped. I love it. It's called Uncanny. It's on the BBC. And it just makes you go, you can't be certain about so much. And yeah, I really love that. And look, it may all be shit. I get it, but it's fun. I also watch a lot of Netflix and, science fiction. It's not true, but it's fun. But this makes me think, and it just makes me think there's more to the world than we can see and hear and measure, at least at this point in time. And maybe one day we'll explain it all. But for now, it looks like there's just some weird shit going on out there.
Yeah, no, I do still love stuff like that too. It's that interest that I had as a young boy around unexplained mysteries. So, but listen to our podcast first, though, before you listen to any of those recommendations.
Totally.
So that's just a hook to get you to listen to us again, because what we'll do is we'll give you more recommendations that you listen to after you listen to our podcast. So thank you.
Well, Brian, happy 100th episode birthday. Thanks for being my friend, and thanks for being my co-host. And thanks for being I don't know. Thanks for being Brian.
And thank you. Thank you for being Troy. And thank you for having the vision for this, for us to start it. It's been good. It's been fun. We've really, really loved it, and we've loved all of you people listening. So thank you again, and we will see you next time. If you'd like to connect with the I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist podcast, then please see the links in our link tree in the show notes. We invite you to join our listener community on Facebook, and we're also on Instagram, X, and Reddit. Check out our merch on Redbubble. We've got t-shirts, hoodies, mugs, and all kinds of great ex-evangelical stuff that you can wear proudly. All proceeds go to building and promoting the podcast. We want to give a huge shout out to our Patreon supporters. Subscribers get a range of benefits, including free merch, early access to episodes, access to our exclusive subscribers group, and monthly bonus content. Again, all proceeds of this go to the running and promotion costs of the podcast. A special thanks to Ava, who manages our social strategy, and also to Kerry and Bree, who manage our Facebook listener group, and also to Bree, who puts out our monthly newsletter on Substack. All of our episodes are transcribed by Leanne to increase accessibility. The show is produced and hosted by Brian McDowell and Troy Waller. The sound engineering for this episode was done by Jonathan O'Brien. I Was a Teenage Fundamentalist is available wherever you find your podcasts. Again, you can find all our links in our link tree in the show notes. Or why don't you pop across to our website at www.iwasateenagefundamentalist.com.